Welcome everybody. We're really excited to be spending an hour and a half today with you. And we're going to be talking about teaching students with learning differences during remote learning. I was a special educator on the East Coast for about 10 years, and this is my first year on the West Coast. I'm a doctoral program at UCI within education. And my specialty is definitely technology integration, special ed, thinking about kind of developmentally what we want to be thinking about when we use technology and some of the affordances of it and limitations too. So that's some of what we're going to be talking about today.
So I'm Hannah Peters. I am a middle school special education teacher. Predominantly been working in a collaborative class, mostly in language arts, but I've been a special educator for about 10 years. Over in Virginia, where Allison used to also be a teacher. So I'm really happy to be here with you. My main focus is just trying to bring access in our generally struggle to access the curriculum in class, but also are having some difficulties accessing this new virtual remote learning that we're trying to navigate together. But I found that a lot of these strategies also can be extremely useful for all students. So I hope that you guys are able to take some strategies back to your school as well.
So I just want to give folks a little bit of background about the UCI Teacher Academy before we get started. Today's session and the series that we've been offering this summer are being hosted by the UCI Teacher Academy. This is a group that was funded with an initial grant from the Schools First Federal Credit Union. The purpose of the Teacher Academy was to really support the university and the School of Education in developing a much more outward facing, community engaged approach. And this takes a lot of different forms. But I'll just point out 4 key pillars of the Teacher Academy. So we really think about teacher learning over the lifespan. Teaching is a profession that requires ongoing personal education and personal development and growth. We think about that happens at the beginning in teacher preparation, and in California in particular, because teacher preparation only happens in such a brief time. We can't imagine that teachers are fully equipped at the end of a teacher credential program to develop expertise in teaching. So we think about how we can support teachers as they move into the profession alongside the other opportunities that they have available to them. We also think about preparing teacher leaders. What does it mean to be a teacher on special assignment, someone who could support others, as well as administrative leadership? What does it mean to really think about and support the advancement of local instructional improvement efforts? And our spirit is we try to work in the spirit of teachers have a rich knowledge base and a lot of expertise. So we want to create a context where teachers can collaborate with each other, they can inspire each other, so that they can become local leaders to lead transformations in instructional efforts in their schools. So that's really the spirit of the Teacher Academy. So I want to thank the Schools First. If you're interested in learning more about the Teacher Academy, I believe I put our link to the website. We're only 2 years young. So we're just heading into our 3rd year, and we're hoping that over the course of the next 10 years or so, we can really be seen as a site that's really integrated with the community to support professional learning. So thanks for joining us today. I'm really thankful for Allison and Hannah for coming here today. Allison's a new student in our PhD program who brings so much expertise in thinking about technology, thinking about supporting diverse learners, thinking about really high quality educational experiences for youth. And it's wonderful that she was able to bring her colleague Hannah here to share their expertise to support learners moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to them. I'm going to turn my video off because it's a little shaky, but I will be here and I'll be taking notes and listening in on the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Beth. So I also just wanted to say that, we framed this as thinking about students with learning differences as one aspect of equity, which is kind of our specialty, Hannah and I as special educators. But we just want to acknowledge that there's lots of different ways to think about equity in learning, but we kind of come from a universal design for learning perspective. So a lot of what we'll talk about today is under that philosophy, and that if you remove a lot of barriers for students to access instruction and interactions online, it can be great for students. And I'll turn it over to Hannah.
Yeah, so just in getting started, we wanted to go over a few of our Zoom norms for this meeting. Also a great way to start your classroom meetings or classroom instruction with students as well. So we'd love for you to just go ahead and keep your microphone on mute until we get to the discussion or question portion of the presentation. Please feel free to use the chat feature or to pose a question or a comment. There's also an awesome little raising your hand feature that you can use as well. Allison and I are going to try to get to the questions as we move through the slides, but we're also going to try to leave a few minutes at the end to answer questions. So please feel free to pose questions as we move along. And also feel free to turn off your video or leave your video on. I know in the spring, a lot of my students, their connection was pretty weak. And so sometimes turning your video off can increase your ability to access what you're listening to. We also recognize that there's a lot going on in people's lives right now. So feel free to come and go as you need to. I'm usually quite often wearing a child in a front pack, but luckily today I do not have someone distracting the whole Zoom. But please, we understand that there's a lot going on. So please come and go as you feel fit, and turn your video on or off if you'd like.
So really quickly, I just wanted to touch on our goals that were also in the program description we sent out. This is kind of where we're headed. We're hoping that people who are attending today will walk away with some tech tools, with some strategies for small group instruction, especially for students with learning differences that can also be extended to larger groups, and also ways to troubleshoot common issues that come from what you all expressed, those of you who had a chance to fill out the Google form, and also from some research that I've been doing interviewing special educators across the country during the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, trying to figure out some of their challenges and the innovations that they've stumbled upon or intentionally, designed to within. And we'll also some grab and go resources for you that we will share with you today. So we're going to start class in a way that Hannah or I, and probably many of you, would start in a normal class with some kind of warm up or check-in. So we're going to be using the chat, and just for those of you who haven't been using the chat, or it's been a few weeks or months, that is a screenshot, if you look at the slide screen, of where you can find the chat feature. So if you just want to locate the chat button on your Zoom screen, it's like a little word bubble, and then if you click it, then you should be able to type into that text box. And our prompt today is going to be, what is one thing that has brought you joy in the past week? So if you don't mind going ahead and typing in something that comes to mind, something that's brought you joy in the past week. This is our introductory warm-up. So one reason we wanted to do this is to model, we'll also hear what brings you joy, catching up with friends, long bike rides, and also just to think about what this does for students. So it can really elicit participation for students who maybe feel reluctant to speak up in a large Zoom group. It's kind of strange when there's a lot of people in a Zoom group to speak for some students. And it's also a great way to build community in this new kind of digital learning. This will be the first time you're starting the year with a group of students, rather than in person. So anything we can do to build that community is really awesome. And again, just like in the real classroom, wait time is important. Some people want some time to think and then type. And depending on students' typing skills, that might take a little while. And some other ideas for stuff like this, I'm sure you have many, because the things that you'd use in person, you could just translate to an online chat prompt. But the rose thorn concept, like what's one great thing about this week, what's one thing you struggled with, or even sharing an emoji. There's little Zoom reaction emojis you can share about like your current mood or how your day is going. So there's some options as well. But thank you all for sharing.
So we also really appreciate everyone that was able to fill out the Google form that was sent out before this presentation. We wanted to get a sense of what the needs were, what educators were looking to hear, or some of the digital tools that may be missing or missing in the spring that you would like access to. So we have a wide range of people with us today, but we really wanted to focus on strategies for building community, engaging students through some digital tools and resources that we have. I also think it's important to note that a Google form is a really quick and easy way to engage your students. Students really like to see themselves reflected in the classroom. And so being able to use a Google form before instruction as a way of getting to know students is a really nice way to then show sort of the makeup of your classroom, or likes and dislikes, or using it as assessment. So we think Google Forms is a great way of sort of surveying your class for many different reasons.
And where to find our materials today? I'm going to go ahead and share a link tree, and this is kind of what it'll look like on your end if you can see the slides. The first link will be to today's slides if you want to follow along or just look after the fact. They all have live links, so if you want to be kind of clicking along at some of the things we talk about, that's helpful. Then the second one is a Tech Tools for Equity. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat for those of you who want to click on that. And then lastly is the grab and go resources, and that will stay there for, the foreseeable future. So feel free to, explore that later when we talk about them or after the fact. But for anyone who would like to follow along and access these links right now, I went ahead and put that link in the chat. And I also just added a link to the actual Linktree website. Like, if this is a design that would be helpful for you, sometimes you just need a place for students to access multiple links. This is a kind of cool digital tool for you to use.
So this is just sort of an outline of where we're going. We're going to start by talking about connecting with students and families. Students have been out of the physical classroom for many months, so to really focus on trying to connect with the students in your classroom and build a community is going to be really important if we're looking to try to teach and have them access new material. Then we're going to move into conducting small group instruction virtually, and some strategies and resources that we have that will help facilitate small group and really access the learners that do better in a smaller setting. And then we're going to talk about best of tools for remote learning. So these are a bunch of digital tools that could be used within a Zoom or pre-Zoom, so students can access the curriculum that we'll be teaching, and talk about shooting common issues. So I know for me, there was a lot of challenges that happened in the spring when we were testing this out. We tried to address those, and then tried to think of things and things that might happen in the fall, and some ways that we could try to work those through before they happen. So that's sort of where we're headed. All right, so we're going to start with talking about connecting with students. So these are 3 strategies I used in the spring and hope to then use in the fall. I found these to be pretty crucial in my instruction and my continued relationship building with my students. Although I knew my students in the spring, so it was a little bit easier to continue to build those relationships. I'm going to focus at least the first part of the fall, really trying to build learning partnerships with my students and their families or guardians at home. I don't know that the can happen until we touch on social emotional health and their basic needs, because they've been so disconnected from the physical school community for so long. So these are all live links as well. The first one is a preference survey, and I sent this out right at the beginning of the distance learning. Part of the survey, I'm going to show you on the next slide, but the first part of the survey really asks guardians and families what their most comfortable way of communicating with me and the school is. Thanks, Allison. Because I have my own preferences in terms of communicating. I also have the ways that I tended to communicate with families in the past, and that was generally over the phone or through email. Quickly, I found that families and guardians much preferred to text message. And so that was a change I had to make. Historically, I know many teachers haven't been comfortable with that type of communication. So continue to stay true to what you're comfortable with. I definitely had to sort of open myself up to various ways of communicating. I also wanted to really check in with families about how they were feeling about virtual learning. I wanted it to be a partnership and not just sort of teachers telling families how this was all going to work. I wanted to work together with families. So it was really helpful to take the temperature of how people were feeling. I also think that's something that you could do with your students on a regular basis. I also was curious about their learning preferences. So based on what I knew of them in the classroom, what was it going to look like virtually? And I think down in the corner, a lot of students, it was a bit of a mixture. So some students needed some paper pencil work in addition to small group virtual lessons. So it was a bit of a puzzle trying to figure it out, but this survey was really quick way to collect information from many families. And then lastly was asking families what the most productive time of the day is. So I know that a lot of schedules are going to be dictated for students, but I think it'll be really important to keep in mind that a lot of students are going to be creating their own structure during the day. So knowing when they're going to be most productive is going to be helpful in terms of sort of assessing as they show up to your Zooms, if they're a little unfocused or if it's a little loud in the background, then you're able to know that maybe that's when other people are working in their households, or maybe that's a student that you're going to have to check in with a little bit more during the day. So I found that to be extremely helpful.
Hey, Hannah, quick question. Freddie was wondering if you can produce these forms in Spanish. Do you know of a Google form feature where it directly translates?
So I that's a great question. I had to do that through Google Translate, and I always make two forms. I even have to. There's a couple other languages that are spoken at my school that Google Translate was able to do for me. I have to copy the text in Translate and read it again. So I make a couple copies of the form. I also try to utilize some of the of our language teachers and our ESOL teachers at the school to help me when it comes to translating. But I always make sure there's at least a Spanish version of the form for families. That's a great question.
Yeah, and we can dump the Spanish version into our grab and go resources.
Yep.
I'm making a note of that right now.
Yep, great. The second strategy that I thought was extremely helpful and also really new to me was the check and connect method, which comes out of the University of Minnesota. So this is a method that's traditionally used to engage students that are typically hard to reach. And it was designed to be used within the school, but my school used it at the beginning of distance learning. So it's intended to be timely, personal check-ins, not based around academic learning, rather really these social emotional check-ins that help build relationship trust between a mentor, which was the teacher in this case, and a group of students. So I used it for my caseload and then every student that I taught in the collab class. I learned a lot about students during this time. I was also able to develop individualized interventions with each student. They were small, but I could track them based on the conversations that sort of fit within the method of check and connect. That's a live link. The website is amazing. It's also a strategy where you can kind of take bits and pieces and make sure that it fits with how you're working. It also works really well with existing initiatives like RTI. So this was also an intervention that we use for students in the tier 2 and tier 3 interventions through RTI. And then lastly, quickly, just a getting to know you form. So this was something I sent to students. I on it. You can collect really quick information about how they're doing, what they enjoy, what they like, what they don't like about distance learning. And you feel free to take that one and change it however you see fit. Oh yes, and then quickly, again, I really had to get comfortable with sort of this power of texting because it allowed families to really access their teachers in a bit of a different way. So again, it doesn't require a computer or internet, and I have a lot of students that were struggling to have really sustainable internet that would allow them to sit and stream a lesson. Translation is extremely easy. Again, something that I had to use quite frequently, but over text, families feel comfortable texting in their native language, and then I can quickly translate using things like Google Translate and text it back. So it's a nice way to build a solid relationship, and everyone feels really comfortable. Also a nice way to end Zoom readers. So students are going to have a lot on their plate in terms of organizing their day. So being able to quickly remind them of a classroom hours, lessons, texting is a nice way to do that. But again, please stay true to what you're comfortable with. That was just one thing that I had to kind of open up to.
Sorry, Hannah. We
go
have
ahead.
a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Someone was asking how many students you typically interact with each day and how manageable the check and connect was.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I had a caseload of a special ed caseload of 15, but I taught this year I taught over 40 students in my collab class. And the way that our collab works is that I'm a full teacher in that classroom. So, but in the spring, we were assigned 15 students to check and connect. So rather than checking and connecting with every student in the classes that you teach, each teacher was assigned a caseload. So it was almost like you were the mentor for 15 students. Everyone in the school got a check and connect mentor. It may or may not have been a teacher that they already had a relationship with, but what was important is that every kid in our school had a mentor to check in with. 15 was a lot, but I can tell you that it quickly became a wonderful resource for the students, someone that they knew they could go to, rather than having to go to 5 or 6 teachers at once for questions about what's happening in school. It was like a point person, and it was really nice to build those really solid relationships with a small group of students. So it can be done a lot of different ways, but I think sticking with a smaller group and having every student assigned to somebody was extremely helpful.
Katrina rightly pointed out that there are things like Remind that are really useful for translation. And also, if you are someone who isn't super comfortable sharing your personal, you want to respect that. So Remind is a great app, and it sounds like some people are already using it. And it is double blind, so you don't get family phone numbers and they don't get your phone number, and you operate it through the Remind app. And I looked into the pricing because I used it when I was a classroom teacher too, but I just wanted to stay updated because sometimes things start out free and then they start to cost money. So you can use it for a decent amount of students free. And then some schools decide to purchase larger packages. And then you can also use your Google account. I put a link there for using Google Voice as an alternative to Remind. So again, if texting is not something on your personal device that you'd like to engage in, these are some helpful options otherwise. Great. And then I just wanted to make a quick note for people who want to be following along with the presentation. If you are in gallery and you want to pin my screen so that you can see the slides as we go along, you can click on the little square and on my screen, on my shared screen with the slides where the 3 dots show up, and you can click pin screen, or you could just do gallery view and where you'd see everyone and both Hannah and I speaking along with the slides, just as a quick note. In the spirit of reaching all families, we want to acknowledge that one great part about a school that is linguistically diverse is you have lots of languages that are spoken, lots of home languages. Sometimes it can make it challenging to communicate if you're not fluent in that home language. So there is an app that's free for up to 200 students called Talking Points. And the visual here is what it kind of looks like, where you know, the teacher who may be an English speaker texts in their native language, and then it translates automatically to the family that they're trying to reach. You put in their phone number and you also select their home language, and then it translates back to you in a back and forth. So that is another tool. And again, Google Translate. And I know someone in the chat, Walter, said that if your default language in Chrome is Spanish, then Chrome will probably prompt you to do a translation in Spanish. So that's also something that's a good idea to explore in terms of web browsing. Some of us, when we're talking about building relationship with students, which we know is so important for their academic growth, you know, that trust, that willingness to take a risk, to really engage in a learning partnership, that building of relationships that happens in the beginning of the year and over time is so important. So when we're talking about remote learning, and especially for students with learning differences, how do we start to build that when we're all online? So that's what this section is going to kind of be about. We want to think about some strategies for that. So one quick way is just inviting students to edit their names on Zoom to what they would like to be called. They can change the background to something they like. Changing the background, we're going to talk about a little bit later, but you can see I changed mine to, you know, the days of in-person classrooms. And they could do, you know, their favorite musician, or a place that they like, or their favorite food. Like, there's so many different ways to kind of customize and to invite them to bring themselves to a Zoom call in particular. And then warm-ups or check-ins, you know, we used the Zoom chat for this, but there's also a Zoom feature called polling, which is really, really awesome. Hannah and I have been experimenting with it the last few weeks. Unfortunately, and this is kind of something that happens with teaching with technology sometimes, we had intended to try it today, but we figured out that because we didn't set up a meeting account, that's the meeting had not enabled polling, that we were not able to do it today. But we are going to talk about what it looks like on the teacher end. I have some screenshots of it, but that's a good like teachable moment of, you know, just making sure you have that polling enabled if that's something you'd like to do. And again, we'll get a look at that later, but that's a very cool option for all kinds of things, and on how someone's doing, like 1 to 10, but also, you know, an on the fly content specific poll, you know, just checking in some formative feedback as you're going through a lesson virtually. And then in terms of another strategy to build community online, we have classroom meetings. And some of you may be familiar with this. Responsive classroom was really big in the district that Hannah and I are coming from. And we would have classroom meetings, and that is pretty easy to transfer online. I clicked the link to Responsive Classroom if you are interested in learning more, but pretty much it's just a time to greet each other, to share, to do some kind of social skills training, but really it's a game, but it's really great. We've seen a lot of positive benefits.
It looks like some quick notes about the preferences. So making sure that your Zoom is up to date will be really important because they do frequent updates. So making sure, and then you can't change settings, it looks like, for a meeting that was already scheduled. So if you're doing meetings consistently every week, just making sure that your settings are the way you want them. Thank you for those.
Hannah, did you have anything else you wanted to add on this one? I know we both were talking.
No, I just think the poll is going to be an awesome way to really take the temperature of your class, because you could at any given time have students that are functioning at sort of a 1, they're not focused, they're not ready to go, and then have students that are at a 10 that are really ready to go. So for me, I want to know sort of what the spectrum of my class is, so that I'm able to really be cognizant of where students are at and who's super engaged and who needs a little bit more support or an additional check-in. But also for pre-assessments and assessments, I think the poll feature is awesome. And it's anonymous. I think we'll talk about that later, until you end the Zoom session, which I think is really cool.
So we also can think about community building through instructional activities. Small group breakouts, which we're going to experiment with today, are really great ways to make your Zoom class a little smaller, make it feel, I feel like, a little more inviting than trying to talk to a whole group. And again, that comes down to learning differences. You know, some kids are very comfortable in a large group, some kids are more comfortable in small groups, but it really tends to get students chatting more with each other. And we also have collaborative work. So one big affordance of digital technologies is the ability to collaborate. So I put a snapshot of the Google Suite for Education up here, but there's lots of digitals out there, we'll talk about more later, that allow students to collaborate with each other through partners or small groups. And, you know, it's the challenges of partner and group work are very similar to in-person. You know, they don't always go as smoothly. So setting up norms and expectations for group work, partner group, is also really important in the remote learning world. But sharing sheets, docs, slides, anything like that, it really gives students a chance to work together, to have some social interaction, which we know is really important for this time when they're so used to having that in person. And then if we think about, you know, how you would run a regular lesson in class, so we usually have a closing or some kind of, you know, bringing the community back together. So closing a lesson in a digital format could be students sharing takeaways through a chat or through a poll or through a Google form, a muddiest point. So asking students, like, what were you unclear about today? Kind of acknowledging it's okay to be unclear about some things, and it's okay to express that to each other, because probably someone else is wondering the same thing. And then small group summaries is another thing. You know, you can set up a shared Google Doc or shared slides, which we're going to see a little bit later, and students could, in small groups, summarize what you did that day, and then you could see all the student summaries in the same document. So that's just another way to kind of close the lesson, to maximize this affordance of collaborative technology that we have. And then I linked to our grab and go resources on this slide. And again, you'll have a link to all these things later for something Hannah put together of just more ideas for community building online. If that's something that's really important to you, we put those all in one place if you'd like to learn more. All right, so we are going to move into conducting small group instruction. So you can absolutely extend this to larger groups, but from experience, when we're talking about students with learning differences, smaller groups can really be beneficial to them if you have the supports you need for that, you know, in terms of like the teachers and the technology and kind of the bandwidth that you're operating with. So we kind of see it in three parts setting up. We've got thinking about scheduling, which is really important. You want to think about the communication preferences and schedules of families. And then ideally, we would want to align this with schools, a school-wide schedule, which can be challenging for some people and some schools. But one thing that emerged from the interviews I've been doing with special educators is that students with learning differences were really struggling to come online and meet with teachers when things conflicted, like if their language arts class and their special educator wanted to meet at the same time, or if it was one time and another the other, that presented a barrier to getting them to show up, to getting them to engage. So if it's possible to start that conversation with your school to streamline a schedule, and we'll show an example of that in a moment, that routine and that consistency can be really helpful, especially in times of uncertainty. And then we want to think about expectations. So we started this call with some Zoom expectations. Again, those are really important, especially with younger students and middle school students. But I would argue for all students, just kind of norming what's going to happen during the call. And it's going to look different based on students' needs and, you know, the age group and all that. And then in terms of what can I use these small groups for? They can be for check-ins, they can be for small group or whole group instruction, they can be for peer collaboration in small groups. You know, you could just be a facilitator for small group work if that's something that instructionally matches your goals and you feel like that's important, especially in giving students time to work together to socialize. And then the special education side, or if you're comfortable as a general educator, teaching assistive technology is also something that we've done through things like Snap and Read. There are all kinds of like co-writer assistive technologies that you can use small groups to teach either a couple of students how to use a function or, you know, a one-on-one. Again, back to schedules. So consistent schedules are really helpful. If the entire school can get on a schedule, that's ideal. When possible, live meetings each day seem to be emerging as something that's very beneficial for kids. That's gonna look different, and you're gonna have different abilities of kids to show up based on their home responsibilities. You know, some students are taking care of younger children. Some students have a lot of attention needs. You know, it's going to be different, but when possible, live meetings at a consistent time see emerging as something that that helps students stay engaged, that stay accountable. And accountability is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, and something that emerged from the Google form is something that you all noticed. You know, how do I keep my kids showing up? How do I keep them accountable for what they're doing? And consistent schedule can be one thing that can help with that.
I think this is a great idea. So in the chat, Miss Alice has talked about doing short tutorial videos of screen recordings and then posting them on Google Classroom. That I think is a fabulous idea. So students can watch them repeatedly before the lesson, before they then dive into one of the activities like Edpuzzle, which is also a great tech. Yep, it's great. Expectations for Zoom. So we've sort of mentioned before, I think students are gonna have to really create their own at-home school environment like they did in the spring. And so just considering, again, some privacy options. So if students want to explore appropriate backgrounds to put behind them, and then being aware of conducting one-on-one sessions if students are not able to access the sort of whole group instruction, and that would be based on individual needs. And then I think it's really important to normalize interruptions in remote learning challenges. So as transparent as you can be with your students, I think the more trust and relationship building you'll have. I often found, at least in the spring, that some of the interruptions that were happening during instruction allowed me to get to know the students so much better they could see the interruptions that were happening at my home, and I could see the ones that were happening at their home. And then I was able to ask about baby brother that was crying in the background, or the siblings that were running around, or a poster that I saw. So I think interruptions can be challenging, but they can also be a way of getting to know your students in a way that we don't often get to know them in a different way. So, all right. So a couple of things that we can do to check in while we're using Zoom. And it sounds like a lot of people are really good at using Google. So I love Google Keep. It's something that I've used with my students in terms of keeping them organized during a lesson, and then also as a way of planning for the week. So I'm going to use Google Keep this fall. I'm also going to use Canva, which is an awesome website. It's linked here, that allows it's a free subscription for teachers, and it allows teachers to create visuals. So you can create a flow chart, you can create a weekly schedule, you can create T-charts, but the tool is already there for you. You just have to type in and personalize it yourself. So I found this really helpful for students with executive functioning issues, because I think organizing their week virtually and at home is going to be, they found it particularly difficult in the spring, so I foresee it being difficult in the fall. But with Google Keep, you can set reminders, you can color code, the students can virtually check off like a checklist, and then you can be a collaborator on that checklist, so you can do that together. And then hopefully the goal would be for them to be able to use that completely on their own as an organizational system.
All right. So then thinking about individual small group instruction during Zoom, we just wanted to point out a couple of features, and we're actually going to touch on this in our best of as well. But sharing screens is something that we've done where students will share their screens and talk through their thinking. You can also share your screen. We're going to demo the whiteboard, and those of you who have not experimented with it yet, it's pretty fun, and it can be really helpful for instruction. Also, teaching students how to split your screen. I know it sounds like a pretty simple thing, but there's a lot of tabs that operate in remote learning. So having, a student piece of work, whether it's docs or slides or whatever, on one side of their screen, and then, having you as their instructor on the other side, just those digital fluency skills of teaching them how to split their screen can be really helpful. And I know someone suggested doing tutorial videos. That's something you could record a tutorial video of splitting your screen, and students can, refresh themselves on how to do that if you post it in a shared space.
It looks like, Allison, it looks like Walter has a question. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? Okay, yep.
Well, I just wonder, because I saw it for the first time on the screen that's currently there, the iPhone/iPad via cable. And I did that last year, and I'm just wondering if anyone has been able to use that successfully, that screen sharing option that's been...
Yeah. I know I have been on calls with speech therapists who have used it successfully. I haven't tried it out myself, but it seems to flow pretty seamlessly. She was using an app for early childhood education for eliciting language, and she just switched in between. But I would love to hear in the chat if anyone else has experimented with connecting an iPhone or iPad. So feel free, if you've done that, to pop that in the chat. So it sounds like something people could experiment with. Yeah.
I also know that a lot of teachers were able to check out document cams and use them through Zoom. That was really nice, so that you could be writing and the students could actually see what you were writing on a piece of paper after they share your screen. So document cams is a piece of technology that work well with Zoom if you're trying to do direct instruction type, especially for math, things that you actually have to work out step by step, or writing.
Yeah. Screencast
is also an awesome app. Yep.
So in addition to sharing screen, splitting your screen, we're just going to experiment with the virtual whiteboard. So as you can see, there are these options when you share your screen that are displayed on the slide, and whiteboard is one of them. So I've actually never transitioned from a slide to a whiteboard. I believe it looks like I have to stop my share and then do a new share. So we'll see what happens. All right. And then, okay. So you should be able to see a whiteboard at this point. And I want to, maybe Hannah, you can operate the chat with me. I wanted to go ahead and just demo a graphic organizer, so a Venn diagram.
Yep.
And then I wanted to ask if anyone has 2 things they would like to compare. If you could kind of monitor the chat and give me 2 things. If anyone has comparison, 2 things we could compare with a Venn diagram to model this whiteboard.
Let's do comparing distance learning to traditional.
There we go. I like it.
Okay.
Oof.
Distance learning, traditional learning. What is the same? If anyone wants to pop things that are the same into the chat, and Hannah will relay them to me.
Yeah, taking care of students. That's something that we need to do for both. Absolutely. Yep. Direct instruction. Yep, it needs to happen in terms of both. Might look different. Small group instruction. Yep. Warm-ups. Absolutely. Still holding high expectations. That's a really crucial one. Yep.
All right, in the interest of space, if I had more time to make this
These are all
pretty, I
great.
would, yeah, I'm
Yep.
sure there are lots more. Okay,
Assessments also great. Yep.
let's
Agree with all.
move to what is unique about distance learning.
Yeah, virtual meetings, absolutely. Yes, uncontrollable environments. Woo. Yes. Yeah, parents are managing behavior, limited access to students, absolutely. Learning new digital platforms, these are all great components of this is digital learning, distance learning. Yep. Tech problems, yoga pants. Yes.
Yep. All right. Okay, and traditional learning, you know, what
Yep.
do we not have? Yeah. What is unique about traditional learning?
Face-to-face interactions, absolutely. Yep. Group close interactions, absolutely. Yeah, proximity, because you're, yep, within proximity of students and teachers. Yep. That's good. Group projects, hands-on projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think gauging student learning quickly is going to be a challenge for distance learning. Yep, that's a good one. One more thing with the whiteboard that I just wanted to point out is that for students that have sort of get overstimulated quickly with visuals, the amount of white space and then that you can control the different colors, I think is really helpful when you're trying to do some sort of direct instruction. Students are able to really hone in to what you're teaching because of the amount of white space that you can leave on the whiteboard. So.
And there's lots of bells and whistles. You can see kind of different shapes, different arrows, different kinds of things, stamps. I can do a spotlight. So this is a great thing to just experiment with in your own time if you'd like to. You just click share screen and then the whiteboard button. And you can also save this. So you could, if you did something during a live session with students or did a Venn diagram that you wanted them to have access to, you could save it as an image and then post it to a shared space.
Yep. And Allison, can you add images to the whiteboard?
Let's see.
I think you can. And I know you can play around with the colors, background and the text color.
I can select. You know, I'm not sure, but I will put that on my note to find out. I know that on screen share, when you're just sharing your screen, you can annotate the screen. So like if you had a picture pulled up on a web browser or on your screen, you could share your screen and then annotate it. But I will check out the whiteboard thing. All right, I'm gonna move back over to the slides. Thank you for bearing with my switching. All right. And then, you know, this is a pretty old school approach, but there's also, you know, when I talk to some special educators, they had good success with mailing home paper materials. You have to prepare them a lot in advance, but you would mail them home. And then for some students, you know, it made sense to then just use Zoom as a conference feature and working with the paper and holding it up and doing that. Again, that's a pretty old school, but it might be best for students. I also want to acknowledge that. In the chat box, we would love to hear from you how you could imagine yourself using the whiteboard with a small group or a large group of students. And if you want students to share their whiteboard, they do have to have co-host abilities, but you can enable and disable that really easily. So if you want them to share their whiteboards, you can definitely turn that on and off rather than giving kind of sharing permissions throughout the whole thing. It's up to you, you know, whatever you feel comfortable with. Great, thank you for those responses. So we are going to move into some ideas, tools, and strategies for, oh yeah, writing process, definitely, for what to do and how to use certain tools for remote learning. And this comes out of our experience as educators. This comes out of kind of me talking to some people about what they've innovated on in the past 5 months. So again, we're kind of back to Zoom. They have a lot of great features in Zoom. We've got small group breakouts, we've got the whiteboard, we've got recorded lectures, which is really important for students who need to access asynchronously. You know, it's probably going to be pretty rare where all students can show up to a live meeting. So being able to take that recorded lecture and post it after the fact is really helpful. Engagement. So we have the poll, which we're going to look at in a second on the next slide, what it looks like on the teacher end. And we had planned, but you know, teachable moment. You have to enable on your Zoom account. And there's also a thumbs up feature.
Can I say a quick note?
Yeah, Walter.
Because
yes.
this, the thing that you're referring to, my favorite features that last year, I noticed for teachers that want to use this, it's actually, you know how we see the reactions on our screen with the little smiley plus thing? I ended up not using those reactions because they were quite limited. Like there's only the thumbs up and the clappy hands.
Sure.
But then what you have to do is it's actually under the participants window, the same place where you raise your hand.
Yep.
But if you go in your Zoom preferences, you have to enable, I forgot what it's called right now, but there's a feature you enable. And then there's actually like, I want to say it's like 7 different icons.
Oh.
And they're all like neutral color. So you don't have to worry about like the skin color part. It's like a blue hand, thumbs up and thumbs down. And so I use this all the time for diagnostic assessments. And because when you go to the participants window, you can see your entire class there. And when the students understand, they give the thumbs up. When they don't, they give a thumbs down. When they have a question, they raise the hand. And I would just give it to them, and it would take about 10 seconds for them to click. And I could tell if the class was mainly on track. It would show their name. And there's also like, I think a checkbox, an X box, and then like a coffee mug or something like that. But I really like that feature.
Yeah.
And my
Thank you
students,
for sharing that.
I think that somebody gave me feedback that that was a good feature at the end of the year.
And we did want to acknowledge some trade-offs with Zoom. Katrina, I don't know if you want to share, you mentioned some concerns about Zoom. If you feel comfortable sharing, feel free to unmute yourself and share them or type them into the chat, but we do want to acknowledge you know, trade-offs for these kinds of technologies.
Sure. So the FBI has said that Zoom is extremely unsafe for privacy issues. And if we're going to be taking that into account for kids, then our school has made the decision that we're going to go straight with Google Meet, but I would have done that anyway because there's just way too much access for other be coming on and for their information to be sold. So there are definitely things that Google Meet has to catch up on with Zoom, and it's working on a lot of the stuff. But I actually did a few hours of research the other day, and I was able to find workarounds for all the things that you're mentioning. So I'd be happy to share that with people if they're interested.
That would be great. If you want to link it in the chat or email me directly, I can put it into our shared resources because I think it's important to
it's in my notes, so I'll email it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to interject. I just had an important note for this topic also. So we did have those issues at our school with the issue is when you create the meeting, the link is by default public. And so I think some students were posting that link on websites. And so we were getting like many people trying to come into classes.
But
then,
it's not just that, it's also like the information within the system not protected enough, and the FBI is not safe to be using this for students.
let's see. I don't know if this workaround counts or not, but I upgraded my account to the premium one. And when you do that, you can restrict the users. And so I restricted it based on the kids' Google accounts, so that only kids in our domain with that student ID would come in. But I don't know if that addresses what the FBI was referring to or not.
No, it's more about just the information that's put into the system, not just Zoom bombing.
I think this is a good example of something that would be great to coordinate with a tech department on, or your school's leadership, because it seems like an important conversation about student privacy and kind of the different settings in Zoom and what families feel comfortable with and you as a school feel and a teacher feel comfortable with. So thank you, both of you, for sharing kind of some workarounds and some concerns, especially when we're wanting to make sure we protect students and their information, and also in the educational experience for them. And I know Anna was wondering, Walter, how you restricted it. So Walter, if you have a resource on how you went about restricting that, feel free to dump it in the chat, or you all can kind of privately message about how to coordinate that, or feel free to send it my way and I'll put it in the resources. All right. So this is what polling looks like for those of you who have not seen it. Again, you want to enable it within your Zoom call and within your account. And the host should be able to do the poll. We experimented with co-hosts, and it seemed like you could do it with co-hosts, but we didn't have a big group of people, so that comes with an asterisk. So you want to make sure as a co-host you would be able to do it and do a run through of that. And it'll take you to a web browser, and you can create the polls ahead of time or on the fly. And the slide, you looks like your end, and you can enable anonymous results and keep them private, or you can see them after the fact. And then what's also cool is, depending on what you are doing, what you're asking about, you can share those results right away with your class. So, if you're giving them a prompt related to the lesson and you're trying to gauge understanding of content material, and I would encourage you to keep it anonymous, you could say, okay, what are we getting about this, and what are we struggling with, and can someone kind of walk us through it? You could also share the anonymous check-in information, be like, okay, so like, how are we doing today, and what does that mean for us? So polling seems like a really great tool.
Right. So Google Slides is also something that I have used a ton. I really enjoy it. I love the collaborative group work feature. So being able to post Google Slides to Google Classroom or email it to students, and then being able to enable two students or two or more to work together on one slide is a great resource for small group. You can also, I've done this through PowerPoint, which feels a little bit old school, but you can create a PowerPoint, then you can record yourself reading the PowerPoint. It becomes a bit of an instructional video, and then you could either play it or you could post it on Google Classroom. And then it's also nice for a discussion log. So having each student have a slide or each group have a slide, and then posting questions, whether it be about literature or in response to a math problem. Interactive lessons. There's also a feature where you can answer questions and pose questions through Google as well. And all of these links are live for you to check out as well. And then the slides all come from Slide Carnival, which is an awesome way to find fun, accessible templates for you when you're creating Google Slides. And then just two more sort of tech, digital, cool activities, cool formats are Flipgrid, which I have only used in class and not while we've been on distance learning, but it is an awesome way for students to, especially students who may struggle to get something down on paper or even on the computer before talking it through. So you can pose a question, students could do book talks, and it records the student. It saves it to your sort of class page, and then that student and the teacher can rewatch it. Other students can watch it. They can maybe do some pre-writing activities where the student is recording what they're thinking about for writing, and then watch it again before they start typing. So Flipgrid is super versatile and an awesome thing to use. And then Padlet is just a nice different format of seeing seeing discussion questions or students answering various questions, and they can all see each other's responses. You can also post images and visuals as well. So both are extremely useful digital.
All right. So I don't know about you all, but it's about this time into a Zoom call that I start to get like a little burnt out. So it's something we were thinking about when we were planning this. And so we're going to move into a small group. And, you know, if I was doing this with younger students, I would probably have done this earlier in the call, just as a way to keep them engaged. But also, this is a really nice opportunity, I think, to share with other teachers. As you've seen, there's been so many people who have shared in our chat and out loud, and there's so much local expertise we have as educators. So it's really cool to talk to other teachers. So we're gonna do a small group breakout, and Beth is gonna facilitate it. She's gonna do it randomly, but you can also manually assign Zoom breakout groups ahead of time. And you can also upload like an Excel spreadsheet of the groups, and it'll automatically break them in. So there's some different features of breakout groups that you can use. But we're just gonna do a random breakout group, and what we're gonna ask to do is introduce yourself, and then click on this digital active learning strategies link from the slides, and I'll also put it in the chat, and just try to find one thing that you'd be willing or you can see yourself trying to do as a teacher. And this resource was compiled by someone at UCI, and I want to make sure I give her credit, Megan Linos at UCI. And what's great about it is, as you can see from the screenshot, there's synchronous and asynchronous options for all these things. So something classic like Think, Pair, Share, you know, she gives great breakdowns of how you could do this in a live session or asynchronously. So go ahead.
Sorry. So for the breakout rooms, I was saying in my breakout room that I went on maternity leave 3 weeks into distance learning. So I still am like learning all these new features again. And with the breakout rooms, I know you can assign certain students certain rooms, like everything, but when you're hosting, can you pop into each breakout? Can you see all the breakout rooms at once? Like, how does that look in your view?
You can travel between the breakout rooms. And what I think is really cool, and I don't know if they've fixed this yet, is I was reading an article just like last week that teachers are requesting exactly what you just said, being able to see all the breakout rooms on their screen, and then being able to jump in so you to see what's going on in each. So it sounds like that's been requested of Zoom. I think I would just continue to read the Zoom updates. They have great videos on their sort of like tech page to figure out the different sort of components of Zoom. I'm hoping that by the fall that's the exact feature that they have. But you can jump between meetings, yes, especially if you're the host, you can jump in between meetings. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, if I was doing this with since we were doing this with students, I would really take them to reflect on how that felt and how it was kind of different than, you know, sitting and watching slides and listening to us talk. But I do want to make sure we get to some troubleshooting stuff, since people expressed, you know, some common issues. So we're going to move along to troubleshooting some common issues. And we took your feedback and our experience and, you know, some of my research to this point and what we've been seeing, you know, in the news and kind of in educational journal articles about what's been happening in remote learning. And we want to be really, and we found a couple of things that we could troubleshoot, but we also want to acknowledge that there are some things that are really challenging to remote learning that we don't particularly have the expertise to address, such as like navigating a grading policy. I think that's a really tricky thing. So we didn't address that, even though we did see that as a common theme in people's responses. But we also know that educators are incredibly innovative. So we are gonna share some of what people have come up with. So one thing that emerged was student access to available and you can't engage in remote learning without those things. So I did want to share access to mobile hotspots and Wi-Fi finders. So these are free places. Of course, students would have to travel, but often there are things within walking distance, and you know, that's safe or unsafe depending on your age level. And then tech departments are also deploying mobile hotspots, so you can always contact your tech department or personnel to see if that's an option. And then local libraries and schools have been keeping their Wi-Fi access free and open if students need to access that. Then I linked, for those of you who are interested, internet and device programs that will either for very low cost or free get students who need those things set up with those things. And then in terms of internet, like I think Hannah mentioned earlier, calling in without your video on Zoom in particular, sometimes Google Meets I've found can help with a connectivity.
Yeah, so I think we've touched a little bit on in terms of just helping students provide or define their private place to work. So I know in the spring, many of the families that students I was working with were really struggling to figure out how to create a really productive private space within their home because they had guardians or other siblings all working together. So just continuing to be aware of that. Headphones helped with some students. I also tried to model as much as I could, trying to help them create that space. And then just getting creative. I know I drove to a couple of houses and left 3 tri-boards on porches to try to help create some sort of blockage so that they could really zone in and create that space. And then I think also just being cognizant of that the schedule and the shared space. So if you've got several students working in the same home, it may be a little bit noisier, or it may be something to consider in terms of changing office hours or making yourself available so that student has some sort of private time for them to work productively. So that's a tricky one, and I think it's going to continue to be a challenge in the fall for sure.
So then accountability. So this is something that definitely emerged from your responses, those of you who were able to fill out the Google form, and from the people I've talked to. You know, how do you get students to show up and keep showing up and help them just get online to where you can interact with them? Texting with home or using an app like Remind can definitely help teachers stay in touch with families and keep that tether, especially for students who are traditionally struggle in school for one reason or another. Interesting side note, I've also talked to special educators who said that the flexibility of home has allowed some students to really thrive. So, you know, keeping that tether between teachers and home can be really helpful just for setting student success. So that can be one thing. Also, you know, those of you who are parents might know this. As a parent, you don't want to keep getting texts about like, get your kid online, get your kid online. So it may be an added incentive to help the student get themselves there eventually and scaffold that. Consistent schedules, again, so I kind of screenshotted a resource that we put in our shared drive of just what a remote learning schedule could look like for a grade level. And this is under the assumption that every day kind of looks the same. And you might notice that the time frames are short, the classes are short, keeping in mind you know, what's reasonable to expect of the age level and what remote learning looks like, you know, sitting at a computer for a certain amount of time and giving 15-minute breaks between sessions, and then time for a social lunch, either online or off the computer, you know, and the student would be doing their own lunch at their home. And then I also added in this study hall resource time that I think is an important consideration depending on your special educator model, whether the special educator is pushing into these core content classes or if they need that set aside time to work with their students individually or in small groups.
Get some comments in the comment box. So I think absolutely wearing headphones can also help avoid that echo, which can be really distracting. I could not agree more that setting a schedule early can really help set the structure for the day, as well as setting norms for when is appropriate to reach out. I think when you're at home, it's a little bit unclear about when's an appropriate time to be emailing or texting. And I think setting those norms early is really important. So thanks for bringing that up. Let's see. Oh, and then let's see. Also, if you're using Google Voice number, you can set a do not disturb setting so that you don't get notifications. Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. All right. So I found that in the spring was a huge challenge for students. Try to, like we talked about in the comments, start this off pretty early to prevent some of the student stress, but a lot of my students struggle with sort of that executive functioning skills. So making sure to get them some sort of visual learning schedule or help create that with them on some of the digital platforms that we've shared, whether it be Google Forms or Canva, or just in a Google Doc table, some sort of structure for them. Personalized planners. So I know my school in the past has been doing sort of physical planners. So if they continue to do that, either mailing them or dropping those off at students' houses might be something that our school does. And then again, I mentioned this before with Whiteboard, but I think if we're going to be on the computer, even in physical school, just being aware of the colors that you're using and the white space and the amount of visuals that you're using on the screen, so that students really know well, one, don't become visually overstimulated, and two, really are able to hone in on the sort of the curriculum or the point that you're making on your slide. So that happened quite often. And so just being aware of the type of visuals and the white space that you're using on your slides.
And I also just wanted to drive home the point that in this screenshot, you know, there's different classroom links and Zoom links in the same document. So that encouraged students to have a one-stop shop, because what we heard was it's really hard for students to navigate between Google Classroom, then Zoom, then like all these different platforms. But, you know, that's kind of a reality of remote learning. So having something all in one place where students can just go there and say, okay, I know I have this class at this time. We use Google Classroom, or we use Canva, or we use Blackboard. And then this is the meeting space, whether it's Zoom or Google Meets or whatever, so that they can click into those things as needed. All right, so we are going to read through some grab and go resources that we have put in our grab and go resources. I'm just going to put the link for our link tree again in the chat so that you can navigate to that if you lost links. We've been opening a lot of tabs, and we're just going to highlight a few of them. So this is one, it's called Tech Tools for Equity, and it's based in universal design for learning. And this might be helpful for those of you who are looking for specific tools or ideas, such as like a learning choice board, or how to give feedback, or how to use Google Forms as a formative assessment, that kind of thing. It's structured into content-specific supports for those of you who express interest in specific things like math or science. There, if you scroll down on that resource, there are specific links for those content areas, as well as things like cognitive support. So this is really aimed and based in universal design, opening up access to all the learning expertise for students who learn in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with Canva, just because it's such a variety of organizational tools on there, and you get a pro account if you're an educator. So it's literally millions of different visuals. So I think that would be a real fun one for students to explore with you. And then I think just Zoom schedules are going to be extremely important with live links, so students know exactly where to go to, whether it's for a meeting or actual instruction. And then Google Docs can also just be a way of you creating different tables or different visuals for students to organize themselves. I think all of these lend themselves to being able to be individualized based on the student's needs. So.
And then we put together some student and family outreach scripts and forms. Sometimes it kind of just takes the out if you already have some customized. So we gave script for an email for the beginning of the year if you'd like to use that or tailor it. That was Hannah's. And communication preference forms to send out to families at the beginning of the year. Those are all there in case you would like them. And I also have a different set of slides. We don't want to overwhelm you, so feel free to just like not even click into these things. But if you're interested in learning more about universal design for learning and specific ways to tailor your instruction, those exist, and we added those. Again, you do not have to click on those at all. We just wanted to make sure you got what you needed from today. And lastly, just a quick shout out to all the special educators. If you are interested in participating in a study that I am doing, it involves an interview, there's a gift card compensation, feel free to email me, no pressure, totally volunteer based. But if that's something you're interested in, just kind of your experience as a special educator during COVID-19. Yeah, and we just wanted to thank you. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We know there's a lot of demands. There's a lot to think about. This is a truly unique summer for educators. So we really appreciate your expertise and your time. And feel free to stick around for a few minutes to chat with us, ask questions. If you have any takeaways, feel free to put them in the chat box. And we are going to send out just a brief feedback survey through email. I know we already sent you a survey, but we're doing this session again, and we want to make sure we improve. As teachers, we're always trying to improve. So if there's something that you felt like could be better, please be on the lookout for that feedback form, and we would love to hear your feedback.
If I can just jump in for a quick second as you're wrapping up, because I've been sitting in on a lot of these calls that are practitioners and school leaders and teacher educators have been leading over the last month or so. I really think one of the things I'm hearing over and over and over again is not only the importance of communicating with students and providing clear calendars and clear structure, but really the importance of communicating with families and parents and guardians. And I think that when we're remote, we've lost some of our ways of thinking about how to do that. I appreciate that you've given us both the reminder and some tools for doing that. So I think families are feeling really disconnected from school and feeling somewhat helpless, and it's causing fear around what this environment's going to look like in the fall. So I feel like the transparency is just so important. So I love that you put together these sort of scripts for us that we can share with people. That's just really helpful and in keeping this ongoing communication going. So thanks so much for that reminder.
So if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or pop them into the chat. We're going to be hanging out, but otherwise, thank you.
Yes, thanks for joining us. I also appreciate all the input that you guys gave us in terms of additional strategies. I've got a list going right now too. So
Thank you so much, guys. I had a lot of questions because this is my hour to really like milk the resources as much as possible. But then I wanted to ask you guys if you, like for assessments, I think there's a webinar about assessments later this week, but since you guys are here, what was your experience with like video assessment? Or did you do a lot of that or much of that? And I'll just share my thing was I had the kids make screencasts and just turn it in on Google Classroom, but I want to do more of like the Flipgrid and the Padlets for videos next year, but I thought I would ask what you guys did.
I did a lot of Google Forms, a lot. I actually did a lot of verbal assessments. So I would have students, I would just have them on the phone. They were most comfortable just doing assessments with me in a small group. I've only used Flipgrid within like the physical classroom. And I did a lot of like just responses to questions because students were more comfortable just responding, talking. But I think using it for an assessment would be really, really fun and meet the needs of a lot of variety of students. So.
Did you find the times you used Flipgrid? It was on my bucket list for like a year, but I just never got around to it. But like with all the students, were you able to like watch everyone's video, or I forgot which setting you're in? Because I have like 180 kids.
Oh yeah, Allison, maybe you can speak to the organization of Flipgrid.
That is a lot of kids. That's a lot of videos to watch. You could watch them all. You definitely have access to them all. I wonder if it would be better in that case to set up some kind of peer review system. Or some because that is a lot of your time to watch them. It could also just be, a setup as a scaffold to an assessment, because it's so much easier for some kids to talk things out. So it could be, show me you're accountable by explaining this thing as a method of studying for a larger assessment as a scaffold. So it could work in a lot of different ways, but yes, you can see all of them. You can comment all of them. You can change the settings to where they could see each other's or not see each other's, depending on your preference.
Because you're saying with peers, if they make a short video and then you want to use peer assessment, did you find this Flipgrid? Because I was thinking maybe in Flipgrid there was like a comment section or something, and so I would maybe pair students up, but you have to comment on someone's video. But does Flipgrid have that?
They do have that. When I used it with middle schoolers, I really spent a lot of time norming it because, comment sections are comment sections.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, Anna, both Edpuzzle is a great way of assessing, and our district also uses Illuminate as well for assessments. And I don't know if I think that has to maybe be a district-wide way of assessing students, but it is quite helpful in terms of collecting data quickly. So.
Oh yeah, that Edpuzzle thing is really cool.
Edpuzzle is great.
I love
so
Edpuzzle.
Is Pear Deck.
Yeah.
Pear Deck is great too. I'd forgotten about Pear Deck. It can be used with slides.
We have a lot of folks at UCI who have been using Pear Deck with our teacher credential candidates. And we did a session back in April, I think, on Pear Deck. And what we're going to be doing is, as these sessions get uploaded to the Teacher Academy website, we'll be emailing the list So Walter will get that out to you. That might be another tool that you find useful.
I love Pear Deck, but I haven't used it for like a year, but I was wondering if Pear Deck has audio now, because I would always use it in class.
Right.
So you're kind of syncing the visual with them, but I thought like, I could do that remotely, but I don't know if they have an audio streaming on there
I don't know.
within
Yeah, I
Pear
don't
Deck.
know
I don't know if
either.
they do or not, but I do like Pear Deck.
Yeah, I don't know either.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to sign out.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
So I have a question really quickly. So I'm a math teacher, and one of the issues I had with distance learning was, well, my district did it in a way where everything became extra credit. So that was kind of a chaotic situation. So the kids are obviously behind, the kids especially who checked out, who are happy with their grade, and they're coming to me this year. But the other issue I was having was not so much teaching math, but I think the kids were really uncomfortable kind of talking to. So last year, because I literally came off of maternity leave and we went to distance learning, so I was kind of just thrown into the fire, not really knowing what was happening. And I really kind of just struggled with accountability in mathematics, and I couldn't really get too upset because a lot of the kids were like, well, I don't really know how to do this, even though when I taught them how to insert equations, or I said, okay, you could kind of write it in and then turn it in, upload the image. Any type of recommendations or suggestions for like higher level math teachers when you have to kind of, not like middle school is a little bit easier, but when you come into like algebra 2 trig or calculus, it was really challenging.
Oh, math is tricky. I know that some of my students really enjoyed watching the Khan Academy videos that are the ones that are free for higher level math. Again, that was just a supplement to the good instruction based on year. I know my student anxiety surrounding math seemed to be more prevalent during the distance learning time as well. It sort of came out, and so I definitely had to sort of they had to readjust to what distance learning looked like and how to do math. I know that the document cam helped a lot of math teachers in terms of being able to do
that.
Yeah, but then for them to have to do it, I was delivering a lot of paper pencil math to students and having them take pictures, and then I was sort of facilitating that then for the math teacher. That's difficult. Allison, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I know Khan Academy is a nice practice and they have practice examples. I wonder if, and you may have already tried, well, I wonder if the accountability might be different because we're going into the fall with like different expectations. So hopefully that is better. And then, once they're showing up, I wonder if like case study groups, where they're all working out one problem and it out together may make them up, because like that's one way they can socialize with their peers, and two, it gets them talking about math in smaller groups that may remove some of that anxiety.
I struggle primarily with like the special service kids because they were obviously math is for most of them an issue. And I tried recording sessions. I mean, I did one-on-one on Zoom with them, so that I was just like doing direct instruction with webcams on. But I think it was just that they just didn't, just the face-to-face is just so important for some of the kids. And I think because there was a disconnect there. And I just don't want to do that going into fall. So I'm trying to prepare for it so I don't have that same type of situation. I don't want kids checking out. That was my biggest thing. Is the thing with mathematics, the biggest challenge you run into is that kids will check out if they don't understand. And once they fall behind, since everything is building on one on top of the other, I think it just has a real effect they can just come out of. So that's just my thing. Like, how do I make sure that they don't fall behind, especially my special service kids who just, it's so easy for them to get distracted, right?
And are you the general ed specialist or the special educator?
No, I'm a general ed, but we do have obviously special ed. I get a lot of the, I don't want to say difficult cases, but like the more challenging students. And so I've always kind of had the biggest load in my classroom with special education. That they're changing that, but nonetheless, that's why like I just really struggle with distance learning. Like in the classroom, it's not so difficult, but the accommodations, right? That was the other thing. Like you have all these different accommodations, but they may not necessarily apply in distance learning settings, but the students are still kind of expecting to be applied. And I just don't know, like, for example, when we were doing assessments, they get double time. But if you're doing a Zoom session, like double time would mean then do I stay on for another hour? And if Google Forms, it's not like they can go back. So then it's starting all over again. So those are some of the challenges that I'm having with special education, special service kids.
I know.
I would go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I know that some of the folks who I work with, that a lot of them, they did do the videotaping and that found that really helpful. And many also scheduled these sort of lots of office hour time so that students could come in and meet one-on-one. The other thing that that I have been seeing is that that the importance of working with as a gen ed teacher, working with the support staff who can work with students. And just in our session last week, we had 2 teachers talking about how they really aligned their calendars so that students sort of knew they had a lot of resources available to them. And Hannah, like I do think that the accountability environment will be different both for teachers and for students this fall. I mean, I think we were just all in emergency crisis mode sort of in the spring. And I like to always remind ourselves we are in the middle of an international pandemic. Like, I think if we just kind of remind ourselves of that, like we are still in the midst of that. That doesn't mean learning goes by the side, but there's a lot going on for us. But I think that what I heard these teachers sharing on their session last week was just how important it was to have this clear calendar of who was available when, who could be their access and support people, and, providing that calendar to them so they knew who was available.
And I would echo that and just encourage you to, as a special educator working in the secondary level, I loved it when general educators pulled me in to think about things and plan things ahead of time, think about the learnership. And I'm sure that's stuff you're already doing, but tech departments, tech specialists, instructional specialists, TOSAs, any kind of coach, I would just maximize the personnel you have access to so that you don't have to do all of it.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a great special service department. I'm sorry, my kid is right next to me. I don't know if I'm gonna see him. That's why I have my video off. But we have a great special service department, and I cannot be more thankful for them. But it's just as a general ed, sometimes when you're trying to integrate both, that's just been, I think, online, that's been kind of a little bit challenging. But I know the fall will be different. So I'm excited. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited. So hopefully it goes well. But thank you guys so much for this. This was amazing. So
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay.